Welcome to the exhibitor workshop today, and I've come to talk about behaviour, learning, and to try and join up some dots between literacy, learning, behaviour, emotional well-being, special needs. So I'm really pleased that you've come along today and that you're giving me your attention. Thank you very much. Perfect. So have I got some teachers in the audience here? Yes, you know what to do, teachers. Well done. Okay. Thank you for coming out on a Saturday and for taking your time to come and have a look around this fantastic exhibition. I'm sure you're going to get lots of really amazing ideas today. And if I've got parents, and hello parents, hi. Have I got others? Hello others. For whatever reason you are here, thank you very much for coming in. Can you tell me why you're here? Are you a journalist? So thank you very much for coming along and to see the exhibition and to pay attention to me today. My name is Julia Clouter. So I'm going to start my presentation and just share some information about you. So I have been a SENCO for certainly more than 10 years and an educator for more than 25 years. And in that time, I have worked in primary education, secondary education. I've also worked in PRUs for primary and secondary. And now I wear another hat as well, which is I work for a company called Scanning Pens. And working for them, I help support by producing resources, looking at the needs of young people in the classroom, looking at the needs of teachers, and trying to ensure that we get really good quality information for you and resources from Scanning Pens to support that product. So that's part of what I do with my Scanning Pens hat on. I also write, I blog, and I talk, and you might find me on social media. Every Wednesday I have a SENCO hour, and that's a forum which is available for people to come ask me questions, for me to provide feedback. So I am trying as actively as I can to give support to the teaching community and to parents and anybody else who might have a question about SEN. So I've not got many of you here, and you've now all got headphones on, so it's hard to get that sort of dynamic of talk to your neighbour because you're now all wired in, aren't you? But could you just have a think for me about who taught you to read, what that experience was like, if it was a positive experience for you, how did they do it? So I'll tell you about me while you're just having a think. I am a child of the 70s and I am a Letterland kid. So I was really lucky to learn with Letterland because there were fabulous stories that were linked to the letters that I was investigating. So the hairy hat man had a big hairy hat, and he had a cat, and if the cat crept up behind the hairy hat man, it would make the hairy hat man sneeze because he had allergies, and you would get the ch sound. So that was my way of learning to read, and it was through stories, and it set my imagination on fire, and I really loved learning to read. It was fabulous. But many of our young children have had a different experience. There was a time in education where phonics became a bit of a dirty word, and we weren't allowed to teach phonics. And so there was a whole group of children who learned through whole word recognition and struggled because they didn't have the segmenting and the blending broken down for them in their learning. And I think there is a whole raft of young people who really struggled to learn when that was in place. We've now in the education system done a revolution, as we do in education, and we're back with synthetic phonics, without the hairy hat man, unfortunately, but we've got a whole different system that is working well for children. In my career, I've come across lots of young people who, no matter what the learning pedagogy, what style I have presented to them, they have struggled to learn how to read. And I'm sure you'll know those young children. And I'm going to talk a sort of a case study about a young man called Connor. And Connor, by the time I came across Connor, he was in year 9 and he was in danger of permanent exclusion. Now, the only thing that Connor really liked was art. And I was responsible for trying to get Connor to engage with reading. And so the reason I've got the lovely Bob Ross on the screen was because it was pretty much the only way I could get him to engage with me. It was to have some Bob Ross time and then some reading time and some writing time. I found his hook, I found a way into his world. But Connor found it very, very difficult in school. He was one of those young people who fell through the gaps. So his parents moved around. You know exactly what these indicators are that are going to mean you're going to struggle to acquire this literacy. Parents moving, parents not willing to engage. Poor transition information came with Connor. He had weak organisation, he loved his art and he loved running, because boy could he run. Absolutely he could run. But when it came to class, he had his very weak expressive and receptive skills and was struggling. And it manifested into avoidance behaviours. Now, I met Connor when he was in year 9 and already in danger of permanent exclusion. And I felt that I'd met a boy who had been failed in the system at every stage that he had been at it. And then when it came to encouraging and supporting him to read so that he could engage with his classwork, I had to go back to all those basics. And I am dyslexia trained, so I did toe by toe and hickey and all the things that I could think of that I knew should work. Multisensory learning, here we are, let's do this. I shall get out my sand tray, we will do air writing. I tried everything with Connor and it just would not work. He was one of these young people who had switched off and had got really angry. And now my attempt to teach him to do anything was met with anger and aggression. And this is a big problem that we have in schools now. I think we have many young people who've reached a point in their learning where we see fight, flight, and we see freeze. And fight, we know what that looks like, don't we? Because I'm sure some of you might have dodged the flying chair in your time. When anger erupts in the classroom, it is frightening and sparky, and other children get frightened and everybody feels fear and anxiety, and then everybody is in a state where their capacity to learn closed down because they're scared. So one person's anxiety can communicate itself to a whole group of children. And flight looks like running away, it's avoidance. Fight, yes, we know what that looks like too. That's pushing and barging to get out of your space and get away from it all. Freeze, you know those learners who've got their head on the desk because they're so exhausted, because the challenge of learning and reading is so tricky. That's, for me, when I'm thinking about the fight, flight, freeze, I'm thinking about behaviours I'm seeing in front of me. And it's an instinctive reaction, and we tend to look at that child and then think, right, you need to stay behind, I need to do something about this, I need to call your parents. And we tend to go into this mode of, I will do this to solve this problem, but we don't step back and investigate because we're under so much time pressure that we've just got to fix it now. And the problem that we've got is that we can't fix the brain that's in a state that is not receptive. Many of the young children that I've taught in PRUs are literally existing in their reptilian brains. It's the primal part that you recess back to in order to survive. So in the PRUs that I've taught in both primary and secondary, I feel very privileged to have had that experience and shared those children's story and the parents' stories as well. Incredibly privileged to have had that. What I know is that when you are presented with learning, your life, everything going on in your world gets in the way of that learning. It becomes a barrier that you just can't get through. So when you are a secondary teacher and someone like Connor is in your face, getting angry with you, telling you that this is shit and they don't want to do it, you kind of have to take a step back and think about your own reaction and take a sidestep and think about this person who is in their reptilian brain telling you through their behaviour, I've got real problems and I need some help. We've all seen it. Connor's internal dialogue when I started to talk to him with the help of Bob Ross. And I said, what's going on in your head in lessons? And he would say to me, everyone hates me, I'm stupid, I can't read. And then I'd say, well, tell me what's going on. I'm not telling you anything. Fear about what I was going to do with that information. By the time our young people are at secondary school, it is so hard to break down the difficulties that may have been ongoing through primary, through early years. Once you get this young person who really believes that school is punishment and they don't want to try anymore, we're in a real bind as educators. So what do we do? We've got to somehow join up the dots and work out what this impact of these children not getting the literacy and learning that they need is. And there are some really interesting bits of research at the moment that tell us that if we don't do something about these young people who are struggling with their literacy, there are serious long-term implications for them. 1 in 10 children, young people aged 5 to 16 have a diagnosable mental health disorder. This is true. There are also many more who have undiagnosed and undiagnosable mental health disorders. I'm going to tell you now, all the answers are true. We have so many children that are self-harming. 14.9% of our young people have SEN. The National Literacy Trust have produced a document from research, and they are telling us that if you do not have literacy, your life is likely to be shorter, considerably shorter. And this is a scary and worrying thing for me, that if we don't acquire our literacy skills, it can literally shorten your life. We've got over 50% of the prison population who haven't achieved functional literacy, and about 20% of them are illiterate. I know this because I've started to work with a researcher called Christine Franklin, who is now working in prisons and working with the Prison Learning Association to try and find out what has happened. Why have we got this correlation between our prison populations and illiteracy? And I can tell you what it is. It's because learning to read didn't happen at the right phase. And then life chances fell in. And then rather than associating with young people in their teenage years when they were at secondary school, with the other young people who were in the positive groups, started to associate with the young people who were in the negative groups, in the non-learner groups. And I've seen it recently with someone who got involved in running county lines, who was a lovely kid who just got absorbed into this world of being vulnerable and then becoming somebody's pawn in a really terrifying game. We know that if we don't get things right for young people, the knock-on effect is really awful for them. And I worry about what we do in secondary schools when we put people into inclusion booths, because we're not solving problems in inclusion booths. We're isolating children with their negative dialogue, and surely we should not be doing that. So one of the things that I did at the school where I was with Connor was he was being sent to the exclusion booth every day to sit with his miserable thoughts and think about his horrible life and be presented with work that he couldn't access, which compounded his misery. And I set up something called a Behaviour Reflection unit in school. And in that Behaviour Reflection unit, it became a forum to do some testing, some assessment, talk about your journey with reading and learning as a youngster, and talk about your friendship groups and how your friendship groups form your identity and your idea of you. And do you know what? It was great for Connor because he realised he was an artist, and he realised that there were picture books that he loved looking at, and he started to build vocabulary. But do you know what? It was very time intensive. And financially for a school to set up with someone who has behaviour expertise to invest time in that child, it's a lot of money. But what I would say is, having seen the whole picture all the way through to people in prisons, spending hours and hours in their cells, not being able to read their probation documents or any of their documents, we can get it wrong at this phase, or we can get it seriously wrong at that phase. We can spend the money in primary education to support learning and get the right tools and equipment and time needed for these children who desperately need support at that phase. Or we can rock it on till they get to secondary, where they're going to need a lot more intensive support, because by that time they're in a state of diffusion and they're with their friends who are giving them fairly negative ideas about their role in society. Or we can roll it on till we get to prison. And I know that sounds really stark, but that's the reality. And I've seen it because I've worked in primary proofs and seen children at the age of 5 at primary proofs who are already in desperate need of support and help and investment, huge amount of investment. So young people need attention. And if they don't get attention here, boy, are they going to get it some other time along the chain, aren't they? And for society, that can become incredibly expensive, hugely expensive. The cost of illiteracy on society is massive. It is something I passionately believe we have got to change. The questions I would ask myself when I'm with my young people who are presenting their behaviours are, what need is your behaviour masking? Because your behaviour is communication. And if I see a group of young, it's usually chaps, but the girls too, but if I see a group of young chaps and they're wide boys, and I know that they're getting themselves into mither in the school community and choosing to make bad decisions, do you know, I make a beeline for those groups. And I say, hey boys, let's set up stall. What can we sell? How can we make money? Who knows how we can make money? And then they go, ooh. And even if it's like a corner sweet shop or a make and do or a sell something thing, I find that if you work on business and entrepreneurial skills with young people, it sparks them, it gives them a reason, and they realise that they're perhaps good at talking or they're good at seeing the angles. And then I can work on those groups because I've given them something that I can intervene with and support, and then I'm the good guy rather than the bad guy who's getting involved with their group and what are you guys doing. So finding strategies to break into their little world and try and put something more positive in there is a really good thing for you to be able to do in school. What happens, I think, in a lot of schools is that these groups get marginalised and they're not invited to the school presentation evenings where the certificates go out, and they know the other kids are getting certificates for great work and they've not been invited. And I think there's a culture where we're not investing in and celebrating the fantastic skills that these young people have, and we've got to make them feel better about themselves and make them realise that they have got skills that can be used well. The other thing that we can do is support much better with assistive technology. So we are in a world now where we've got a fourth revolution in education. We haven't seen the money for it, but we've got it. And the idea is that we've got amazing things that you will see in the show all around you, that we can improve literacy and support mental health and well-being and use tools that are going to encourage young people to want to engage using learning platforms that they actually might want to engage with rather than books which maybe they don't want to engage with all the time. We need to encourage better positive mental health and well-being for these young boys and set up learning mentoring systems within their in-groups so that they're supporting themselves. There are a lot of things that we need to be doing differently in schools. So I've talked about where do we make a start? Is it secondary? Is it at the other end when we're fallen off school and we've still got to retake our exams because we didn't pass them the first time? Or is it at primary school? Where do you think the interventions need to happen for reading and literacy? got to be primary. It's got to be at the formative stages. That's where we've got to make the investment. Because Connor left primary school with a reading age of 5 years and 11 months or so. Now we know that when you get to secondary school, you need a reading age of 11. My son Freddie has just come home with a document. He's starting his GCSEs, and on it says, please read with your child, because a lot of the GCSE texts this year will be pitched at reading age 17. See, are not going to stand a chance. Now, at primary school, we have our data, and we have to get our children through the SATs, and we have to do well and get them through as high as we can with their literacy, but it doesn't bite as hard as it does at secondary school. Because at secondary school, if you've not acquired that reading level, you are already on that downward spiral. You're already catching up. If transition information about that child's needs does not travel with them, we are already on the downward spiral. So for schools that are doing a brilliant job of transition and who are providing really good supporting information, fantastic, and thank you, you're doing an amazing job. Please keep doing that. Because we don't want these young people, I know this is a crazy slide, right? I've got this little boy here with lots of tattoos, and I'm imagining it's with his friend or sister who's a little bit older, who's got her tattoos as well. And what I'm saying is, by the time the children get to secondary school, they're already identifying with the out-group. And then we're losing them because our world isn't their world and they don't want to listen to us. So that's why intervention has got to happen at primary school. That's why we need to get in and start investing more. If your friends are rebelling at secondary school, and you're identifying with the out-group, that's what you're going to do. So that's what Connor did. And the reaction of staff was, inclusion room. In the behaviour reflection room, if you twist this round and think about it a little differently, what you are doing is you are putting a huge amount of energy into young children to just try to give them some support, some skills, some strategies, so that they can cope with what they've got going on in life. And sometimes it's life story work. But what we need to be doing is presenting them with positive images, positive messages, and really looking at, can they access their curriculum? Do they know what lesson they've got to go to next? Are they sequencing information? Are they missing information? Are they really hearing and understanding? In the behaviour reflection room, you can do amazing things, like you can work with Lego to reconstruct stories of things that have happened and unpick what's happened with learning. Restorative justice. Do any of you guys know about or do restorative justice in your fabulous stuff? Restorative justice is so good because it gives everybody who has felt injustice an opportunity to have that conversation. So Connor had stolen some stuff from the local shop, and I got the phone call from the shopkeeper, and okay, Connor, let's have a look at what's happened here. And he expected me to wave my finger and shout at him because that's what his parents are really good at doing. And so for me to then sit down and have a conversation and say, who's this affected? What happened? How was the shopkeeper feeling? How would your mum feel if she knew that that's what had happened? How am I feeling about this? How are you feeling about this? Unpicking it. And then we looked at some newspaper clippings about people who'd stolen things and what happened in their lives. I tried to look at a bigger picture. And then we wrote a letter to the shopkeeper. And just when he thought we were going to go and post it, we went round there with the letter and we read it to the shopkeeper. That's great restorative justice, and something that we need to be doing with our young people, whether it is just that explosive moment in school where someone kicks somebody else. Sorry is really not massively helpful. Restorative justice is much more helpful. And behaviour reflection rooms are a good place to do that in, along with assessments and intervention, particularly literacy assessments, because you start to uncover all sorts of things. I uncovered that poor old Connor was sitting in lessons and not understanding a word that was going on. No wonder he was so angry and confrontational. No wonder he felt so dreadful about himself. So things that we did to help Connor was we started to explore some assistive technology that might help him. What could help him? iPad, Dragon Speak, recording, a little recording device so that he could get the homework. We started to give him tools that he was able to use, and he felt more positive, much more positive when he had those. Boosting his self-esteem was huge and really important because it was flatlining self-esteem. And he really needed an investment of support to encourage him to believe that he had skills. And good old Bob Ross helped me to help Connor understand that he was fabulous at painting. And we started to make little canvases, you know, these tiny little canvases you could buy. And then we started to sell them, and people started to buy them because it was Connor's. And it had his logo on it and his tag. And they started to sell his artwork. And he started to feel good about himself. He felt he had a purpose. He felt he was doing well in school. And it's a question of trying to find the hook to get to our young people, to give them the thing that lifts them up. Screening for dyslexia is crucial when you are seeing that a child is not succeeding on the phonics programs that are being delivered. And I know that Connor had continuously been given the same phonics program. It's like a scratch, right? Oh, I didn't succeed with phonics in year 1, didn't succeed with phonics year 2, didn't succeed with phonics year 3. Oh, secondary school, still doing phonics. This scratch, it's like a mental scratch. And I actually believe that if we get literacy and learning wrong, it leads to sort of like a post-traumatic stress disorder for young people who keep having the same stuff presented to them and they still don't get it. That mental scratch results in all those avoidance behaviours, all of that anger, and then you're into that reptilian part of your brain, fight, flight, freeze, and you're angry. And it's because we've not spent the time unpicking, unpacking, and trying to find the right approach for that child. And it's not always what is prescribed by Ofsted or the DFE. Sometimes it's different. And sometimes it's unpacking that individual and finding out what makes them tick, what makes them passionate about life and learning. So I'll tell you a story about a prisoner who learnt to read. He learnt to read with a scanning pen. I told you I had a research friend called Christine, and she went into prison and she met this chap who was in his 50s. She said he was ripped. He had lost a lot of weight and he'd got a really good body. He'd been doing his physical work and he'd changed his body shape and he got really healthy, but he was illiterate. And she was having a conversation with him and said, "What do you think about reading then?" And then I won't repeat what he said, but I'm sure you could imagine probably what he said. And she said, "Well, what's your thing?" So, like dogs. So, okay, well, we'll find a book on dogs. So she gave him a book on dogs and a reader pen. And these chaps spend an awful lot of time in their cells, you know, many, many hours. And he went through and he looked at the pictures and he knew the names of some of the dogs. And so Labrador he knew, Alsatian he knew. And he started to look and decode. And then he used a reader pen to look and decode. And he went through. And then he realised that he was starting to sight read some of the words that he'd used this tool, which reads back the word to you, and was starting to sight read some of the words. He then had managed to acquire some reading by the time he'd gone through this book on dogs that he was really keen on learning about, and was then able to go to his parole information, and realised that some of it was wrong. He could read it for the first time in his life. That was huge for him. He'd acquired some reading skills that enabled him to change what happened next. He was also able not to have meatballs for dinner because everybody told him it was just meatballs on the menu, sadly, because they thought that was funny. And there were other things on the menu, but he couldn't read it, so he thought it was just meatballs every day. So the impact of being able to give someone an opportunity to read can be huge and life-changing. If you are dyslexic and you are in this scratch and your response is anger, we've got to spend a bit more time unpicking and unpacking as teachers. It's a good investment. And then you've invested lots of time in this young person and you are the expert on Connor, and then you give him to somebody else, right? And poor old Connor has got the same problem if I don't get transition right for him. And this is a crucial part of what we need to be doing, is producing good transition documentation for young people. So I had an idea in my primary lesson. I said, let's get the stuff out and put it on the desk. What do you use to help you with your learning? You use you've got a pink overlay, great, let's put that on your desk. Or you like your fiddle toy, great, put it on your desk. What else have you got? What else do you use? And we covered the desks in the things that they like. And some of them were just, I like my pen with the wobbly top. Fine, put it on your desk. That's the thing that helps you. Take a photograph of it with their name on the desk and send it to the next school so they know what the tools are that student needs. That's such a quick and easy way to transfer information, because I know we're all pushed and under pressure for time. The very least, that is something that you can do, is share what those learning tools are that supported that young person. Connor, when I sussed this out, my lights went on. Connor was so agitated. It was a teeth grinder, His jaw was always working. He was fiddling. And I found, that Velcro, you pull it one way and you get that nice rip, and then on one side you've got one texture, the other side you've got the other bit rough, one's a bit smooth. And I gave him some to stick underneath his table in his form room, because that's where he was getting particularly agitated, so that he could just run his finger on the sensory bit underneath his table. And we just did some breathing exercises, just feeling this Velcro tape, just doing our deep breath. It's okay. It's going to be all right. I know where I can get help. And I'm doing okay, and I'm a good person. And we did these mantras, just feeling the Velcro. And that was something that helped Connor to stay in lessons and engage with learning. So if you've got any sensory learners, do you know what? And it's so discreet under the table. You can even put them under the exam room tables for the young people, just to give them a bit of sensory feedback. That really helped him. It turned out that Connor had ASD. By the time I got him into year 10, we had an assessment. He also had dyslexia. We got an assessment, we sorted things out. We were able to put things in place for this young man. He realised he was a fabulous artist. He was always going to be a wide boy, and he knew that he could sell his paintings because they were cool, because they had the Connor tag on them. And I felt like I'd done a good job with this young man, but it was a time investment and it needed a lot of unpicking. So here we are at Tes, and when I talked about putting all the lovely things out on the table, which you're going to buy with all the money you haven't got, right? You might have to think about really carefully about what you're going to invest in, what you're going to buy to support your young people. And you need to have a think about the amazing assistive technology that's out there and try and find things that are going to support the children and that are a good investment. There's now a Rocket Fund. Do you aware of the Rocket Fund? Okay, so there's a website that you can go onto and you can start pledging. So you go on, you create your own page. So Miami School would like to buy 6 iPads, and then you create a page on the website, and then you encourage people to pledge and raise money online so that you can buy some more equipment. It's a useful way to go about raising some funds when things are tricky, when you've not got money. And it's difficult to make those decisions about where am I going to put this money, what am I going to spend it on. My argument to the government is please invest more in schools, particularly primary schools, for equipment that will support literacy, because you're only going to spend it at the other end if you don't spend it at this end. And actually you're going to spend an awful lot more supporting people in the criminal justice system and people who've got mental health issues and all the other difficulties that come at the other end. For me, the whole thing's in a mess. I know where I would put the money. It makes sense to me. We've got to invest it in primary, and we've got to get transition right. And the assistive technology supports challenges with being able to hear, challenges with being able to see, being able to read. There's fantastic dyslexia resources out there available for our young people to use. If only we could get our hands on the money and had the time to train to use them, because that's the other issue, isn't it? It's the time it takes. But for improved academic performance, increasing motivation for young people, and giving them an awareness of what their limitations are and a knowledge of how to overcome that, we can do that at primary, and we can put the tools into their hands that they then feel confident about using. We're going to have less problems a little bit further along when they don't want to be using assistive technology in front of their mates or be seen as the guy who's using the extra support. They're not going to want the TA. They're going to get to a stage at secondary where they are going to reject that. So how do we make working with assistive technology at primary accessible for them? Okay, I said I wear a hat for scanning pens, so is it all right if I put my scanning pens hat on? Do you mind? Is that okay? So I'll talk briefly about what scanning pens can do. Have you come across the scanning pens before? Have they been helpful in your schools? So Scanning Pens employed me to be their head of education because they recognised that they were supporting young people with reading, and that's fantastic. But it's part of what we need to do for schools. And so Scanning Pens asked me if I would produce some resources and create some materials for teachers that are scanning pen friendly, that help children learn how to use the pens, and help teachers to have a plenary resource or a starter activity so that you can use that with the pen. So that's what I've been doing for a little while now. I've been creating some resources and trying to develop some ideas to give you ways of using this tool in the classroom. So I have got, just underneath here, some cards, and if anyone would like resources from me, I'd be really happy to have a conversation and share resources. And very soon we shall have a website, and you should just be able to download things from Scanning Pens that will support your learning with your young people to use this tool. I've got some Jenga blocks around the corner. If anyone wants to come play Jenga with me, I'd love that. Come play Jenga with me. I've been thinking about great ways of using assistive technology in classrooms to make them more inclusive, more fun, and work like games for children and young people. So there's somebody here at the exhibition whose name's Aaron Smith, and he's sorting out a dyslexia conference. It should be really exciting. He's just upstairs. And I did a little blog on Aaron. Aaron is very dyslexic indeed, but he's one of these chaps who is thriving with his dyslexia, and he's inspirational. And I just want to draw your attention to this really amazing person, because he is someone who at school was absolutely depressed and unhappy, and was told by a teaching assistant that he would never learn to read, and had lots of negative messages pushed into him. But he was very lucky that his parents were supportive and positive and got him a dyslexia screener at quite a young age. And he's one of these people who is tenacious and wanted to succeed well. And he worked out that he could use text-to-speech software. He worked out that he could use, it was a very early version of a scanning pen actually, but he could use a scanning pen to support. And that he could use his Office and his Microsoft tools to help him do things that he wouldn't otherwise be able to do. So he dictates information into his computer, and he supports people around him, and other people around support him by getting his organisation sorted out, because that's a problem for him. So he uses timing tools and devices. So as I was talking to this gentleman who is the chairman of his dyslexia association now, he used to go there to get help when he was younger, and now he's absolutely involved with this organisation in Leicester. And I've talked to him and I've said, what was it for you? What made the difference? And he said it was the assistive technology and just deciding that he was not going to let it squash him. And having some support from the people around him, telling him, you know what, you will make something of yourself. You can do this. So please, with your young people, think about how powerful your positive messages are, how positive and powerful your voice is. If you're going back to a school with isolation booths, please have conversations with your teams about the emotional well-being impact of those isolation booths and whether something could be done differently. Because until we look at these young people as individuals, unpick their needs, address what they need, provide them with the support and the tools that they need, we are really just creating a problem that is going to be really heavy burden for them and for us later down the line. You are doing an amazing job with supporting your young people, and please continue to do so, and please continue to see the good and the positives in all of your young people and to work with that and encourage them, be it painting or dogs or whatever it is. I encourage you, when you have that learner who is picking up the chair, that you think about the hook, the thing that makes them happy, or the thing that might switch them on and spark them so that we can rearrange their world and their lives. So that concludes my talk, which is joining the dots for learning and behaviour. I hope I have done that through my case study, and I hope I've given you some thoughts to travel away with today. And thank you very much for your time.